right, so first play we're going to look at, 2nd and 2, one of the Patriots' first offensive plays.
What's going on, everyone? Mike Kadlick, Taylor Kyles here for CLNS Media, back with another episode of the Patriots Daily Podcast, powered as always by our good friends over at Prize Picks. And today, powered by a full house, as you can see on screen. We got the Sumer Sports Squad here, Lindsay, Rhodes, and Sam Bruchhaus joining us for a little post-NFL Combine recap. Going to run through the Patriots' positions of needs, find out what metrics they deem to matter most from some of these guys coming into the league, and also look at some Patriots fits and thoughts on all of these prime positions for New England. So we'll get through all of that. But before we get started, Lindsay, Sam, thank you guys so much for joining us. Appreciate the time as always. How has your post-combine week been so far?
It's good. Sam is at a data like offsite right now. So he just went straight into a different work trip with colleagues of ours at Sumer Sports working on the next project. I wore a special hat for you guys because I know that a lot of your audience might be a little bit sad about what just happened at the start of February. And I wanted to remind them of the time that they did beat the Seahawks in the Super Bowl. So there you go.
Love it.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. Like Lindsay said, we have been on the road for the better part of 6 weeks. We've had canceled flights, basically ice road truckers in Dallas, Chile, Mobile, New Orleans, San Francisco, and then finally the Combine. I got to say, guys, the Combine was an absolute blast this year.
Fun.
I feel like the draft is a little bit more up in the air post pick 1 than we've seen in recent years. I mean, pick 2 could be 6 potential guys. There's all kinds of different, positional value conversations going on, a lot of fun stuff. And so I just had an absolute blast at the Combine, and I'm happy to discuss it here today.
Yeah, this is our kind of draft, I think, for Sam and I.
Love it. Love it. Fun stuff. Go ahead, Taylor. You were going to say something.
I'm curious. So now what is your criteria? Like, what gets you excited about the draft? And like you said, the positional value conversations are going to be very interesting. Seems like a draft where kind of for the second year in a row, maybe it's not quite there the way people anticipate, but from your opinion, does that make it a bad draft, or what constitutes good versus bad in your eyes? I think that's
yes. So I think my biggest element to the draft, and this is what my master's research is in, this is the reason I'm in this industry, is understanding the process in the NFL. The best general managers of all time hit on 40 to 50% of their draft picks. It is immensely hard to draft well in this league. That being said, one good draft class, as the Patriots kind of had this year and to a certain degree the year prior, can mean a Super Bowl difference. So it's immensely important, but immensely difficult. And so in order to optimize based on that, you have to have good process. So the things that I really enjoy talking about are the value of a pick and how it exponentially decreases, the way to maximize surplus value in terms of which position you're drafting, how much you can expect them to produce, and how much they could potentially be paid on their second contract, and how much they're going to be paid on their first contract as a result. And then the following bit is just trying to maintain what we call in the data community base rates. And this is something that, me and Lindsay really talk about deeply, because you're always shooting for that ceiling, and it's in the scouts and the team's interest to try to draft based on ceiling, but you always got to remember the base rate. For example, the number 1 pick in the draft, if it is a quarterback, on average sees a career very similar to what we've seen Justin Fields do. Now, are you trying to draft someone who's slightly better than Justin Fields? Absolutely not. And that's the value of the first pick, is that you will more likely get an all-pro than the other picks, but the chance that you get an all-pro is still very slim. So those are the things that are in my mind as I'm at the Combine.
Yeah, I think that it's an interesting, you're talking about it being is it a bad class? I think that in the way that people think of draft classes and would define them that way, I would say, yes, it probably does check that box. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, that's just because it's a bad quarterback class and nobody knows how to talk about anything else. That's not true. This is also, it kind of extends to the other position groups that are traditionally understood to be of high positional value by NFL teams. Positional value is assessed by, you see it reflected in pay rates, but it's also just, that is all defined by the positions that more effectively or efficiently can tilt your team from a loss to a win. You have to have good quarterback play. You have to have good protection. So that starts with tackles. They're of high positional value. They're also scarce. So that raises the price of somebody who's good. an edge rusher who affects the quarterback directly is of high positional value, and cornerbacks are of high positional value because they also affect the quarterback's ability to get the ball off with good coverage. So those are primary, and wide receivers. Wide receiver, like a high-end wide receiver one, is also high positional value. If you go down the list of those positions and you look at this class, you're going to find that the guys at the top are in a lot of ways not as good as the guys who have been at the top in past years. So even though we're excited about certain people and we're like, they're the best in this class, when we go look at things, or scouts go look at things that are like a little bit more trait specific, what we find is, and we find ways to like tangibly assess numbers to them, right? Like we have a model that evaluates them in a bunch of different categories and assigns a numeric value to it. And where the highest end position players are in a lot of these traits is like a 7 out of 10, as opposed to a 10 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10. So you're looking at the best in this class are, as a generalization, I'm saying, compared to other classes, a guy who you're looking at and you're going, that's probably going to be an above average starter, as opposed to that is a slam dunk, blue chip guy, can't miss, gotta get him. He's going to be an all pro. And that creates an interesting conversation for people like Sam and I, who love talking about positional value. Because what it's going to do is say, well, if we don't love that guy, that's a high positional value, now do we start having a conversation about taking a blue chip guy at a position that doesn't tilt wins and losses, if we are a team that's built to metabolize that? And then you're talking about Jeremiah Love and like, where does that conversation fit? And then a linebacker, there's some good linebackers in this class. Also a position that's just not sticky from year to year for a lot of different reasons. But do you go, I'm going to take him this year and plug him in because he can help my football team? And so it's a very different conversation we're having about this year's draft class than we typically have. And that's why I think it's so fun.
I'm about to like torch this from a time management standpoint, because I do have one more on the positional value because I think it's such a fun conversation. So in this Super Bowl, and I think in the playoff run, it really showed the value of interior defenders and being able to have the pass rushers who can just wreck the pocket and obviously win in some other ways as well. So you would think, well, those guys are very valuable, so guards and interior offensive linemen should be more valuable. But do you think there's a certain level of, when you talk about the position scarcity, no matter how important those interior guys are, will they always be suppressed because it's so much harder to find a tackle? And to a different degree, I think it's also harder to find an edge rusher. Or where do you kind of evaluate the importance in the game of these inside guys versus how available they are in the draft and in free agency?
I think there's two different elements, Taylor, to this, where number one, there's just less one-on-ones on the interior of the offensive line. And I think that's kind of a massive difference there, as opposed to the edge, where everyone on every single play is attempting to create a one-on-one. It's just a little easier to manage just from a geographic or geometrical perspective. I think that's the reason. But on the flip side of that, the defensive tackle position at this point is functionally considered a premium position. You think of the guys like Barmore, like Milton Williams, like Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter in Philly. Like, all these guys are considered very, very valuable. Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy as well in Seattle. Like, all these guys are virtually considered premium players.
Particularly if they have the ability to impact the quarterback.
100%, particularly up the middle. And so I do think on the flip side, you're actually starting to see guards get paid a little bit more on a sliding scale, where there's a reality where if we continue to see the rise of these kind of 5 down fronts and everyone has to block for a one-on-one and the guards are pulling a lot more and stuff like that, we actually may see, the Joe Toonies, the Trey Smiths get those higher value salaries. And that's really the crux of it. I think there's an interesting standpoint that positional value is always governed by the market. It's not necessarily governed by how important a player is to any given team. So the reality of the situation is there's slotted payment at every spot in the draft. And then the teams get together in free agency and create a market for these players later. So while analytics may say, a guard is very valuable, or a defensive tackle, for example, is very valuable, it may take 3 to 4 years for the market to catch up with that. So I do think, particularly with the Trey Smith contract, we may see the interior linemen start to become more valuable. And certainly you see picks like Gray's Able with the Seahawks paying off. The final element that I want to talk about, and I think this is really interesting with regards to, number one, the Will Campbell conversation, and number two, it's going to come up with Spencer Fano. It's going to come up with, in particular, Francis Maui-Noa and several other players in this draft, is that the guard position can always be moved to. And so it's considered a swing position. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the guys that the Patriots are going to be interested in this draft are going to be swing linemen as a result. So there's this kind of standpoint where the guard and center body type may not always, provide over to the tackle position, but the tackle position can always kind of slide into the guard position. So I think that's kind of the final element in the draft in particular.
That's the only point that I wanted to point out, in addition to everything that Sam just said, is that the reason that tackles are, in addition to the one-on-ones and everything that he just mentioned, is that the body type is so unicorny. Like, if you go find someone who is that size, like height wise, but also that size in terms of like weight, and also they are really athletic and can make all of these all of the movements necessary, and they've got the footwork, like it's so hard to find just that specific body / skill set merged together in a human being, because they just are not that, they don't make a lot of them, right? Mm-hmm. So the tackles are so hard to find. And when we look at the rate of success and like high end play that's consistent, we find that roughly 15 offensive tackles play at like a really high level on average. And they're each team's starting 2. So you're looking at 64 that are on the field. So the drop off at tackle is just greater than the drop off at guard in terms of like, the difference between what is elite and what's coming off the bench. And so I think that that's also part of this conversation.
Which brings you back to Will Campbell, because everyone wants to complain about Will, the arm length and the wingspan. Well, find someone better. Find an equal athlete who has the longer arms, has the wingspan. You just can't. So when you have the opportunity to take those guys, you really do have to. Or obviously with like a Jennings Dunker who we took yesterday in the mock draft, maybe he's not the best offensive tackle body type, but that can make him very valuable, that skill set on the interior. Now I stop talking and we get the show.
No, I love it. And Taylor, you mentioned botching the time management situation. In the rundown we have, instead of starting at one position, we'll kind of dovetail it into what we just mentioned with the offensive line. And we can start there. You mentioned guard tackle versatility. Taylor mentioned a guy like Jennings Dunker. But looking at what the Patriots might need heading into 2026, right tackle and left guard, what did you guys, and Lindsay, we can start with you. What metrics would you say, and we talk about the data-oriented conversation I'm obsessed with. I could have sat here and just listened to you guys go back and forth on that for the entire hour. But like, what metrics matter most at these offensive line positions? And then looking specifically at the Patriots, thoughts on the position as a whole from what we saw last week in Indianapolis, and what players potentially fit in New England would, in your opinion?
The O-line position is, and by the way, this is the one that I kind of circled after looking at the different position groups for the Patriots. I feel like this is one that I would prioritize this offseason, whether that's free agency or the draft, but particularly if you're looking at like a right tackle, and then it might be more of a draft type position. This is going to be an interesting year at this position too, I think, in the draft, because I think that if you look at a lot of the teams that are picking earlier that desperately need quarterbacks, but are not necessarily going to have the ability to find quarterbacks in the first round, I think that an obvious pivot is to go build up the offensive lines, that if you go one by one, you're like, they also need help on the offensive line. So just thinking narratively about how this draft might play out, if you can't get a high-end quarterback in round 1, and you're thinking, maybe I have to go get a guy like a Malik Willis or somebody in free agency that is gonna check that retread box, right? Like, the one thing you have to have for that to work is a healthy environment, and that starts with the offensive line. So it sort of makes sense for all of those teams to maybe just upgrade on the O-line, which creates a trickle down to 31 that is going to be fascinating about like who's going to be left over. But and I'll let Sam give the other data points. But the one thing I mentioned, the traits, we kind of reverse engineered a little bit, like which traits that we measure from are the ones that have most predictively been good at tracking who's going to make the transition from college to the NFL. And so kind of going backwards from that and then saying, okay, now let's look at the people who have those traits. The 4 at the offensive line position that stood out to us are sustain, pass set versus blitz and stunts, point of attack power, and pass protection. And so if you're thinking of like looking at different players' abilities to succeed in those 4 different buckets, then that is, again, just from a predictiveness standpoint, the one that is probably the stickiest in terms of what you're looking for there. It's an interesting O-line class also because the guys at the top are like guys who come out of really run-based offenses, but don't have a lot of stuff on tape about them being like dominant pass blockers. So if you desperately need, if you're a team and you're like, I need someone who can pass protect, that's my priority, then you're maybe looking at a different guy than the guys that we're talking about at the top. Or you're trusting your ability to develop their pass protection and saying, I'm going to get somebody who's really high end in something else. Or if you're looking for somebody who you know, and I know this isn't the case for the Patriots, if you're looking for somebody you know can play left tackle, that's not really the guys that we're talking about. Maui Noah and Fano are maybe right tackles in the NFL. So if you're looking for a left, you're looking for somebody that's probably different than even that. And so it becomes a really interesting class to evaluate in that sense because, and I think that this is becoming true at a lot of different positions. Wide receiver, this is true. You're going like, what specifically do I need this guy to do for my offense? Like, what am I good at elsewhere? What am I not good at? What do I need? Like, what hole am I specifically trying to fill? What am I going to ask this player to do? What is imperative that he do well? And then you start looking for the player that checks those specific boxes and not just who's the best offensive tackle, right? Like it's a more nuanced conversation than that.
Process. Yeah. There we go.
And I think like if you want to get deeper into like the names and the way this draft plays out, like my research is centered around one idea, which is that you try to maximize the amount of value you can get out of any given draft. The players ain't going to change. The picks that you got going into the draft ain't going to change. And so you're just trying to figure out, well, do I need to trade back because I can get more players and that provides depth for a team that made the Super Bowl? Well, is there a player who's on a different tier as compared to everything else? So with the offensive line in particular, I think the best way for the Patriots to attack this draft based on the metrics that matter, which are things like pressure rate. Like we always want to talk in conversation when we're talking about offense and defensive line interaction in terms of pressure rather than the result, because that's a little bit more predictive. And if you want,
he's saying sack, by the way.
Exactly.
Like that's the result here. Yeah.
Exactly. And then if you want to stare at the combine, like the combine is always going to be like a 3 out of 10 in a prospect profile. It's not going to mean a ton, but for offensive linemen, it really does matter because we don't have great, singular individual offensive line metrics really. Right. And so you look at the 40-yard dash, you look at the 3-cone, and particularly for a team who felt decently good about its offensive line, even though you go up against 3 of the craziest defenses that we've really seen ever in the playoffs. And then all of a sudden people start freaking out. Like, duh, they did that to every single team they faced, whether with scheme and great players like Seattle or without scheme and great players like Houston. So it's like, it's really difficult to maintain exactly what was going on at any given point in time because those defenses were so good. But y'all mentioned Jennings Dunker. I've been kind of really intrigued by this guy because I think he can definitely swing to tackle at times. His 40 does indicate that he's more of a guard. Again, like the 40 for offensive line does typically matter, offensive tackles in particular. But Lindsay mentioned that sustain category, which more detailed, it means how are they improving 2 seconds after the play into the run? He's one of the best players we've seen historically at doing that. And that's at the tackle position for a prospect. He's should be able to be found, around the second day of the draft. He has a pressure rate that we don't really love, 3.8%. But interestingly, he has a blue chip time to pressure. That's 4.7 seconds, according to our draft guide, which you can find on Sumersports.com right now. And so that indicates to me that that's a quarterback problem. And here's kind of the final piece to this to think about with regards to Jennings Dunker or a guy like Keelan Rutledge, who had an excellent 3-cone, a very low pressure rate, but is like probably going to play guard at the next level. is that pass protection sometimes gets unheraldedly put on the offensive line when it's probably Drake May who's taking a lot of sacks, unfortunately.
I was going to say, that profile sounds like Morgan Moses a little bit.
Exactly. And so when you're thinking about these offensive linemen, the Patriots are probably a team that needs a little better pass blockers that can sustain for longer because Drake May does take sacks. But the real coaching and development point should not be, oh, we have to get the 5 best pass blockers. It needs to be, we need Drake May to be a little bit more careful. And to be fair, we've seen this with Josh Allen. He took a ton of sacks at the beginning of his career. Then all of a sudden last year when he wins the MVP, he's at like 1% sack rate. Like he just didn't get sacked. Like that was what he did.
And so I think Williams from year 1 to year 2.
Yeah, we saw it with Caleb Williams as well.
Avoidance by a ton.
100%. And so I think when we're talking about we got to protect Drake, we got to protect Drake. No, Drake got to protect Drake. And I think that's going to be the discussion a little bit more going in the offseason. And I think they ironically may be trying to find better run blockers. And I think Dunker or Rutledge are 2 of those guys who could fill that in day 2. Overall, I think offensive line should be a day 2 highlight for them in a way that they may not need to press in the first round as a result.
One quick note, and to your point about timing, sorry.
That's why you're here.
You're a disaster for a timed show. On the Drake May point, we launched a new product during the postseason called Sumer Live, which was like a whole bunch of advanced data points and tendencies and usage and efficiency numbers that we're updating after every play. And one of the things that stood out to me after looking at Drake May specifically was the sack rate was high. Okay, you're playing very good defenses. By the way, I voted for him for MVP. So he had an outstanding season. This is like a one thing that you just are like, this is a way that you can get better, which is also exciting if you're already playing at an MVP level. But there was another thing, and there were 2 games in the playoffs where he had absolutely 0, not 1 pressure to escape attempts. And I want to see that go up too. I want to see the ability to not just throw it away or scramble, but when you are scrambling, keep your eyes up so that you can still attempt that throw downfield. That's like that small detail of development that I think would be a smart thing for them to be working on this offseason with him.
That was something we talked about leading into the Super Bowl, was that he had done a great job early in the season of keeping his eyes downfield and making plays. But I started to realize, I feel like he hasn't done that very often. I think he did it once in the entire playoffs. So getting back to that, and I'm sure second year in the system, there's a lot of elements where he's just going to be more comfortable. They'll know where his weaknesses are. They can attune for that. But Drake absolutely needs to do a better job just protecting himself. Like how many 1-yard, 0-yard sacks did he take throughout the entire season? And also just going to specific prospects. Jennings, Dunker, probably going to be more of a guard if they're talking about long-term, but obviously while you develop, you could see him at right tackle. But I feel like if they want someone who could potentially slide in for Morgan Moses this season, because I think they were very lucky last year for their 34-year-old right tackle to play almost every single snap. And even in the summer, he was in and out, understandably, because they wanted to make sure he was fresh. So whoever that rookie is going to be at right tackle, they're going to play. Now I'm thinking Blake Miller.
That's who I was going to say too.
Okay, fantastic. We're on the same page. And also Max Ihanachor. I hope I'm saying that right. Max I. Yes, I feel like the only guys where you really could expect them to slide in and play some quality ball if they had to. But I'm curious about, like you said, the trickle-down effect. Are those guys going to be available? And could the Patriots maybe risk trading back a little bit, getting some more capital, and maybe taking them a little early in the second round? So I'm curious what your models say and which one of those guys seems like a good pick, potentially at the 31st pick, or if there's any chance they could get them after a trade down, which, again, I do not think is on the table, but just to put it out there.
What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, I think with regards to the draft simulation, one could say, I think there's going to be a run on tackles early. And I don't think that is a game that the Patriots particularly want to play sitting there at the back half of the first round. I don't think they want to trade up and get into this kind of tackle run that's going to occur. And so I do think, with respect to the offensive line in particular, this one could be a situation kind of like the 2024 receiver class, where people are really freaking out trying to get Neighbors and trying to get Roma Dunze and trying to get Marvin Harrison Jr. and where are they going to go? They're all going to go in the top 15, so forth and so on. But then Ladd McConkey falls to the second round. And people are starting to reshuffle. Xavier Worthy, goes in the late part of the first round. So I do think this is going to be a place where they could probably attack in the second round. Day 2 is where I would prefer them to see. Also,
next year,
not for nothing, free agency also is a great place to reshuffle the deck on the interior. So this could definitely be a place where they may be able to take a shot on a guy like Max I from Arizona State, but also kind of refill the deck on the interior with the guards.
It also brings up an interesting point because I was looking at wide receivers for the Patriots, and then even like a Kenyon Sadiq, maybe, right? Like as a tight end, but also kind of going like, is he there at 31? And then the wide receivers that I like the best, are they there at 31? But these conversations feel related because if there's going to be a run on tackles, and then you also have some guys at those, like a Sonny Styles, or certainly there's some edge rushers that come off the board. And if you're going to put, Jeremiah Love obviously is going to go somewhere in this range prior to the Patriots. And so you're just eating up picks that might push a different position group down. So like a wide receiver, and I like a Casey Conception is probably like my favorite new guy and that doesn't mean he's going to be the best wide receiver at all, but for whatever reason, I just find him so intriguing as a prospect. And Mekhi Lemon too. I'm really intrigued by just that style of wide receiver in today's NFL. Also thinking about the Patriots and Josh McDaniels and what he has done historically, what these Patriots offenses have looked like. You have a long history of guys who are a big part of these offenses that operate out of the slot, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to think of like, that type of guy feels interesting there. Will they still be there? That becomes the game. I'm curious about like all of the reports about Mekhi Lemon, which, believe, don't believe, but like if teams had bad experiences with him in their interviews, and if they think that Casey Conception is on the same tier, then do they go, let's pivot to the other guy, and then that pushes Mekhi down just a bump? And maybe more importantly for this conversation, because I kind of had Casey Conception, was a guy who at Super Bowl, I was thinking early second round, like Raiders, maybe when they come back around, like that type of guy would be interesting. I am more and more convinced he's not going to be there then. And I'm not even convinced he's going to be there at 31. But I think that all of these conversations relate to one another in terms of what falls and who falls. And maybe someone like that does, just because of the conversations that we're having about the other needs.
Over at Prize Picks, because as you know, this episode and every episode of Patriots Daily is brought to you by Prize Picks. Shoot your shot on Prize Picks and get $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. That's right. Prize Picks is now giving you $50 in lineups when you sign up and play your first $5. They make every dunk, every dime, and every board that much more exciting. So don't miss this chance to get started on America's #1 app for sports picks. All you got to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. And if you get your picks right, you can cash in. Pick them from all your favorite sports, anything from basketball, baseball, hockey, UFC, college basketball, and more. And they also have a new feature called Early Payouts, where if your player gets off to a hot start, you have the option to cash out before the game even finishes. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use code CLNS and you get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Let's stay on that then. I like the wide receiver tight end conversation. You mentioned Sadiq, obviously. Taylor mentioned the mock draft we did yesterday. He fell to 31, and we were like, hold on, I don't think this is happening, but if so, you return that card immediately.
It was like the Christian Gonzalez situation that year, where anytime he made it to the Patriots in the simulator, I was like, nope, that's a shiny Mewtwo in the wild. I don't think that's fair. I have to respect the board.
But I think that that's actually an interesting just exercise, because I did that before we came on here, looking at the teams, like who takes him?
Yeah.
Like, where is that landing spot? And the one that I actually would kind of love that is ahead of the Patriots, that I can't wrap my brain around them doing for specific reasons, is the Panthers. Like, I actually think plugging him into that offense, if your goal is to get a really strong yay or nay on Bryce Young this year, you have to know. And maybe they already do, and this isn't a priority, but by the end of next year, you got to know, am I paying Bryce Young or am I not paying Bryce Young? So one approach to that could be go all in on the offensive guys around him, take all of the excuses off the table. If it doesn't work, and we've put a solid line, we've got obviously the backfield's okay. It looks like Coker's developing into something that's nice. Tet hit. Like if you put a high end Kenyon Sadiq on the field, and now you've got all of those pass catchers, like what? And then, by the way, even if they do move off of Bryce Young and they go draft somebody next year, look at what that guy's walking into in terms of young talent. So I can't really get rid of the Kenyon Sadiq to the Panthers, but I also know the analytics people that are in the Panthers front office, and I don't know if I could see them advising to go tight end in the first round. And
and to speak more to that, Lindsay, it's like the tight end position is really interesting because, number one, we are getting better at drafting it every year. This is one of the rare position groups where data done by Mike Lopez, who, is now at the NFL front office, has shown that we are actually getting better at drafting tight ends as time goes on. Whether that's athleticism, whether that's the game changing, we're actually improving. The second,
them turning into wide receivers.
Exactly. So the second portion of that is, are they a premium position in the market? No. But they do provide a premium skill, which is pass catching. That being said, typically you don't see a guy like Trey McBride have a Jackson Smith and Jigba type season. But all that considered, the Patriots are in a perfect zone because the line I kind of draw for that when you have a player like a tight end who can provide pass catching, but you don't know necessarily if it's going to be premium, is around where the Patriots are. Kind of pick 31 or, so y'all mentioned trading back into kind of like the 30s and the 40s in the second round. Like if and the third element to this is, if this is going to be the draft where people just start taking non-premium positions off the top of the board, then pass catcher is certifiably where they should go with 31, because then you're going to be in a land where Denzel Boston's probably on the board, Casey Concepcion's on the board, maybe a Mekhi Lemon or someone else falls, a Jordan Tyson if his medicals look weird. Like you're going to have 6 to 7 pass catchers, whether that's at the wide receiver or tight end position as well, that you can kind of start considering that in a normal year would probably go in the middle of the round, but people have just made the decision that on the margins that Jeremiah Love is the top guy in this draft. Caleb Downs is the best guy in this draft. Dylan Thieneman is a guy you can't miss at the safety position. Sonny Styles at the linebacker position. Arvell Reese, if he does play off ball, is a guy that can't be missed. That's 6 guys who are non-premium, non-wide receivers, non-edge rushers, non-tackles that are going to just start backing those guys up and backing those guys up. So it is probably feasible that one of those guys is on the board, and that's a perfect value at 31 in my opinion.
I got to ask quickly, Taylor. I feel like Patriots fans watching this will say every time the Patriots draft a pass catcher this high, they can't hit on them. There's N'Keal Harry, there's Tyquan Thornton, there's Jalen Polk. You mentioned, Sam, the ability for front offices to hit on 40-ish% or what have you, and that's a good general manager, right? Is this a inherently Patriots situation why they can't hit on this? Is this a luck of the draw type thing? I mean, people say the draft is a quote-unquote crapshoot every year, but where do you see the Patriots in their lack of ability to get a pass catcher? And can it change just by, hitting on one at 31, or is it inherently just in their, in their building, if you will?
I mean, just off the top of my head, and I may be misremembering, but I'm thinking about Tyquan Thornton, for example. There's a guy who burned the combine up. I think Jalen Polk did a similar thing, if I remember properly. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But like the combine does not mean a lot for wide receivers. Like we don't know why. Like in theory, being able to run 40 yards implies that you'd be able to run 40 yards really good on a go route. But for whatever reason, the ability to separate, the ability to stack cornerbacks just doesn't show up in the 10-yard sprint or the 40-yard or all these other drills. So one way or the other, I think like the through line through those 3 guys, it seems to me is that like they were just kind of like really athletic guys for one way or the other that just kind of got drafted based on that. And that's why I think when we're talking about guys like Casey Concepcion, like people were worried about his combine output, but on the back end, his metrics were really good. Very similar with Mekhi Lemon and some other guys like that. And so I think that as a result, the Patriots are uniquely set up right now to take advantage of that at the end of the first round and thus get a pass catcher who could be pretty good.
I think, and this answer isn't specifically about the Patriots, but I think one of the reasons I'm so interested in the conception Lemon type of wide receiver is because I think that there is inherently built into them a versatility that is the strength of their game. Like people see that as if they were to start describing them, versatility is one of the first things that they name. Like if you can succeed in that type of inside out role, you are moving around a lot. You are running a bunch of different routes. There is a versatility that's sort of implied and inherent in your skill set. So I think that the team that drafts you has that as a priority and probably is more likely to use you in a variety of different ways. Maybe you're going to see a team that is a team that has a little bit more, like we see teams that use a lot of play action have a higher success rate. Teams that have a lot of motion have a higher like EPA per play on average. Like the things are kind of linked. And I think it all kind of comes down to just being creative with your weapons. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it's not that player is likely to hit just because they're that player. It's because they're going to a team that prioritizes that. And that is what works in the NFL right now is versatility, positionless, think outside the box, do a bunch of things, anything you can think of to confuse the defense. And so I think that it's possible that when you get a guy who checks more of those like traditional wide receiver 1X guys, you could, and again, this isn't a Patriots comment, but I've seen other guys around the league that you're like, they run a ton of routes on the sideline. Like get creative, put him in motion, like move him around, like don't have him come out of the same spot all the time. Mm-hmm. And so I think that maybe there are more paths to failure with someone like that, just because people think that they've checked all of these boxes to be the best wide receiver and that they can just plug them into however they want to use them without necessarily thinking about what their specific skill sets demand from the offense in terms of the way they should be used. So I think it depends on what kind of wide receiver we're looking at, but like maybe there's some crossover in this conversation and what we've seen from the Patriots in that regard.
And not for nothing, talking about versatility, you look at a tight end who I love. And it's a I meets the AI, which is like our goal here.
I think he really likes him.
I like that.
Is Eli Stowers right now mock draft database around like the 50s ish. I think that he'll be in the range, maybe, give or take a couple picks for a second round pick for the Patriots. Maybe he's available. He has he's one of the best separators amongst the tight end position in this draft. The combine is for tight ends is a place where it matters. We really look at the 40 and the broad jump, third in the 40, first in the broad jump, 25% target share, which is something we love to see from these guys. It's a sticky stat at the pro level, so we'd like to see it at the college level, 2.5 yards per route run. That's a blue chip stat as well. Like, there's a lot of stuff coming. So let's say in the first round, maybe you trade back, maybe you go for offensive line. You have other shots at good tight ends, good wide receivers, guys who can add value that I think are really good. And Eli Stowers is one of those guys.
I'm really glad this conversation went to the versatility and the mismatch, because I was going to ask about that, because that's Josh McDaniels' calling card. I felt like we couldn't see it quite as much last season because they didn't have a whole lot of guys you could truly move around the formation and create mismatches. Like there was a touchdown that Demario Douglas caught against the Falcons where he lines up in the backfield, they peel, and then you end up at a linebacker. It was Jalen Walker on pop, and I'm like, yes, I missed that. But you didn't see it a ton. And even earlier in the season, before Hunter Henry kind of started to slow down, understandably, getting up there in age, they were putting him in the backfield and targeting him downfield. Just, I love how Josh is able to put guys in those positions to succeed. But again, they didn't have those dynamic mismatch threats. And even Mike Vrabel, when he was asked about the tight end position, acknowledged that there are guys who are mismatches. There's so many different types. So I feel like in that late first, early second round, it probably is Stowers, probably is Kenyon Sadiq at the tight end position. But who are some receivers? I know Concepcion is probably one of those because of his explosiveness and receiving ability. But are there any other guys that you really think check that box of, if Josh McDaniels gets his hands on this guy, he's going to play early and he's going to be a dynamic chess piece, and also someone who complements a Kyle Williams and maybe offers a slightly different skill set from him?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a host of names that could potentially go, late first, early second. And it's really interesting to see how it breaks down because they're all kind of different. You look at Denzel Boston, that's more of a 6'4", kind of lanky guy that's going to go up and in theory should be your contested catch guy. But like, we didn't necessarily see him have a ton of blue chip traits as it sees. Chris Bell out of Louisville is another one who should be in that group. I
feel
think
weird about him, man.
Yeah.
He's like the Miami game where he doesn't really do a whole lot, but it's 2 catches that he turns into house calls. I'm weird on him.
Exactly. And I definitely agree. And that's why it's kind of tough for me to like pick out any of these names other than KC, because it's just like, yeah, there's a cluster of them, but who's the one?
Right.
And I agree with Lindsay. In my mind, it's KC, but it's just like, it doesn't feel great. Like I personally, I struggle to think that they should really attack the wide receiver position in the first round, just because I think there are options. Like Skyler Bell is a guy we love. 33% target share, 3.1 yards per route run. You can probably get him in the hundreds. So it's like,
let me tell you more about Skyler Bell, because this is where all of the like data and the advancements in tech can help you find people. Like we talked about, Sam talked about, the draft averages. I think that we are actually moving in a direction, and what he said is still true, that where teams are going to get better at drafting just in general, because we have more data, like more information about players in different environments now that they're moving around into different systems, transferring, like all of that counts as information that we can take into consideration about whether it was the system or whether it was them, how versatile they are, how quickly they can adapt to different environments and languages and all that kind of stuff. But in terms of Skyler Bell is an interesting one, that you like, the data pops things that you wouldn't necessarily know. And the fact that he's at UConn, you don't really know what to make of any of this because of the level of competition that he's playing against. So there are questions that you need to answer. But the 3 metrics that I mentioned before that we reverse engineered for wide receiver are hands, run after catch, and vertical threat. And I think you can kind of identify why all 3 of those would maybe put together, paint a picture of somebody that would succeed. He is a 10 in hands. He is a 10 in run after the catch, and he's a 6 in vertical threat, which is a starter level. But a 10 in 2 categories makes him the highest scoring wide receiver in those metrics of all of the wide receivers that are in this class. And then you've got the target share that Sam mentioned, which means target earner. And I don't care what the defense looks like, if your offense has, or even the level of offensive player, if your offense is like, I'm throwing to you, you're going to get it done. And then you are getting it done, because the 3.1 yards per route run is, like, for context, for people who aren't looking at that stat all the time, JSN's was like 3.6 this year. You're looking at like, above 3 is bonkers. College and NFL is totally different, but that's a high number. 30% of his team's air yard share, 65% of his yards are coming after the catch. And if you look in our draft guide, we show depth of field, like all the different depths and the number of targets, the number of times you're targeted at each depth. And then we're putting you in a bucket to show you where that number of targets from a volume standpoint ranks against your class. He is blue in every single depth, meaning top 15% at 20 plus targets, at 10 plus targets, every single depth. So you're getting a lot of screens and stuff. That's a big part of his game, but you can also hit him long. Like, I just think that we're painting a data picture of somebody who was really good in a lot of different ways. And again, what I'm trying to do in the draft is create fewer paths to failure. Right? Like, I want more paths to success. And so for him, if you can come to terms with, like, maybe putting him on a field with other people who are high end, and you've evaluated him versus them and say, now I have a better idea of what it looks like in comparison. I think Skyler Bell might be like my guy that's a little bit later in the draft that I kind of have my eye on. Like, Tez Johnson was this guy for us last year, where he popped in all the metrics. And then he finally gets drafted late, and he goes late because he's small,
right?
But he goes late. And then when he did get on the field this year, we thought people were chanting MVP for him. Like, there were moments where he looked good. And so I kind of think you can maybe even do it that way. You could get a guy late who is a little bit of roll of the dice, but is a good roll.
I haven't gotten a chance to watch Skyler Bell's tape yet. I've been trying to find it. It has been very tough. Everything I've heard about him makes me love him as a potential Stephon Diggs, Demario Douglas type replacement, because it sounds like he had a lot of things. One, you need great hands. with Drake May, and he's like 6 feet, right? So he's not really small. It's more the frame is the issue with him from what I've been led to believe. So I think he could be solid in that role. I'm curious, what is it the 6 of the vertical score? Because if he is successful downfield, is it a size thing for him, or what is it that maybe is holding him back? And could that be more of a skill for him with a quarterback like Drake May, who would give him plenty of opportunities down the field?
That's a great question, because a lot of times, you're measuring what you're measuring. Like you're measuring like what they're actually doing and giving you the ability to measure. But I also want to point out that a 6 as a vertical score is not bad. It's just not massively elite. Like, and this goes back to what we were talking about the high end guys. Like, you go plug any of the quarterbacks in this year's class into these types of metrics and you look at their grades, and a 6 would make you one of the highest guys in the class. Like, it's a lower level of like traits that we're seeing at that particular position, for instance. So I think I look at that less as, ooh, that's concerning in terms of the vertical threat, and more that meets the bar that is necessary as vertical threat. Like, you've crossed we've done a lot of research into like 40 time and speed. And I think that the answer is that you just need to be fast enough. Like, if you're in this bucket, check the box, you're good. Like, as long as you're not too slow, if you're even like at the fastest, I think teams overreact to that. I think we over-index on fastest. So I think from a vertical threat standpoint, I'm like, at least it's not bad. Like, you have cleared that bar. And then the fact that you have elite traits in other areas, that's how I look at it, as opposed to the other way around.
All right, well, we buried the lead a little bit talking about positional value, and we were going to start with edge rusher. So instead, we'll close with edge rusher here. Elliot Wolf, Mike Vrabel talked about the position a little bit this week. It was reported out in Indy as well that the Patriots know that is one of, if not their top position of need. So we will close out again with your thoughts here on the edge. Metrics you're looking at, players you're looking at, obviously a top-heavy position in the draft we already talked about. Arvell Reese and some of those guys at the position. But Patriots-wise, pick 31 around there. Thoughts on it, again, after the week in Indianapolis, and, where the Patriots could potentially go and try and poach one of those guys.
So, and I'll throw this in really quick, just because they had a specific thing they're looking for. Everybody's got their flavors of edge rushers. They really go like 250s to 260s typically, maybe high 280s or 240s. I'm sorry, like a Cassius Howell type in that range. First step explosiveness, pass rush is a big thing for them. And I think you just need to be good enough as a run defender, like a Caleb on Chason, kind of boomer bust, a lot more bust, but he did enough that it's like, all right, he's not a glaring red flag in that area. But I think it's more what they want as a pass rusher. Also, a little bit of coverage versatility, which with a guy like Zion Young, for example, may not be on paper, but then you look at his wave drill and it's like, wait a minute, maybe he can do that. So that's just the criteria, more of like an outside linebacker than a true defensive end for their prototype.
Yeah, I think the Patriots are in a really good spot, because the two positions that we think we can evaluate pretty well, as based on just the numbers, are the pass catchers and the edge rushers, because both of those are kind of one-on-one opportunities, or you're in a situation where you kind of make your own destiny, right? And so the metrics that matter there, we talked about pressure rate allowed. That one can get a little weird from an offensive line perspective, because you are running lots of different types of pass blocking schemes. The quarterback may scramble more, so forth and so on. There's a lot on the quarterback offensive line relationship. Edge rushers, like, that's the stat. Like, pressure rate is the stat. And so it's interesting that you bring up Zion Young, because I kept looking, and I was looking at, Caleb Von Chasson. I was looking at Landry, and I was looking at all these other guys who the Vrabel kind of Patriot tree has had. And it doesn't match up particularly, like you said, Taylor, but the numbers just love him, number one. And number two, like, this is the time to get the edge rusher at this part in the draft, because there's not a lot in front of it, and that's going to get eaten up quick. And there's really not a lot below it. Like, you start looking at some of the guys down the board. You start looking at Romello Height, Derek Moore, LT Overton, Malachi Lawrence. Like, those are guys who are, I feel okay about, but they don't really have any like blue chip standout stuff that really in the metrics really highlights what I really want to see. And Zion Young does have those things. He has a blue chip pressure rate, which you can check on consumersports.com. He also does bring an element of run stuffing if you need it. He has a blue chip tackle for loss rate, which I really liked. And then that shows up in our more advanced traits metrics, which Lindsay has been talking about as well. He's very good at stunting, and so he can work kind of alongside those defensive tackles to get multiple one-on-ones. In terms of lateral range, you talked about kind of more of an outside linebacker. We talk about lateral range when we talk about edge rushers is his ability to make plays in multiple gaps or to the sideline. He has a blue chip trait in that. And so there's this profile that looks good from a Patriots perspective. You said he's super athletic. Maybe he has some coverage upside. Obviously wasn't asked to do that a ton at Missouri, but it just like doesn't fit in the box. And I think the box sometimes gets a little too closed, right? And so I think a guy like Zion Young, who's just great value, great metrics, and not for nothing, I don't know if you can call this a transfer up, but he succeeded at two different places. And this is something that the Rams have really locked in on, where it's like, if there's a transfer up guy who we know can produce in the numbers, we're going to get him. Jared Verse, transfer up guy. Braden Fisk, transfer up guy. Kobe Turner. They drafted Josiah Stewart, who played some pretty good snaps for him this year. Transfer up guy. So it does make sense to me that he kind of has what I like to see as, data analyst guy who doesn't have to worry about scheme and all this stuff. And so like the player to attack, in my mind, if I'm the Patriots and I'm not necessarily in the box of my defense as this, would be Zion Young at that 31 selection, as compared to some of the wide receivers where I think I can get another pass catcher later, or an offensive lineman where I think I can get a swing guard, swing tackle, address it through free agency on the interior somewhere else. That, like, the edge rusher position feels like the one where you either grab someone who's dropping or you kind of pull up a guy like Zion Young or some of these other guys who may be gone as early as pick 35.
Mm-hmm.
Two things off of that. The transfer up thing is the more information data thing that I was talking about, right? Like, it's because you're someone else is identifying for you to a degree. Like, they're going, hey, we think that guy has outplayed his situation here and should come here. And then if they succeed there, and if we're talking about them in the draft, they did, then now you have more evidence of like people kind of co-signing on this situation. There's a wisdom of the crowds that Sam talks about a lot around this time of year. And so it's an easy way to identify somebody who might be flying under the radar, as opposed to like the way that people are talking about them. I think you can identify also the ability to play in different systems and languages. Like I said, I think there's value there. The pressure rate that I wanted to go back to that he said there, because I don't know that this is a widely accepted thing, but Sam and I just sort of like say it like we're in agreement. The pressure rate versus the sack rate is the key to evaluating this position, because it's the process versus the result. And like in any other thing, you're like, is your process sound, right? And if you are finding ways to put pressure on the quarterback consistently, then your process is sound. You are winning your one-on-ones at a rate that is, what you're looking for. The sack rate can be affected by the quarterbacks that you're playing or the offensive linemen that you're playing. Are you playing against a particularly good offensive lineman that can hold their block better than a different offensive lineman that another edge rusher is going up against? Are you going up against a Lamar Jackson type or somebody who has the ability to flush out of the pocket and just make sure that your pressure doesn't turn into a sack? A lot of times, like we said, that sack number is a quarterback stat in a lot of different cases. So that could be true for the edge rusher also, if whether they're able to get one home. Also I lost my train of thought. Pressure, sack. It's an ability. Oh, the other thing was that the pressures actually have value too. And that's the thing that goes under discussed, because there's no way like a sack is a one specific end result that is the same result every time, but a pressure leads to different results. It might lead to a throwaway. It might lead to a poor throw, a rushed throw. Maybe it leads to an interception, but we don't track that in the same way that we do the results of a sack. But we did for our show, The Evaluation, that's airing right now, that's talking about different draft prospects. It's on YouTube. For the defensive line episode, I did research about pressure versus sack and found that the expected points added on a play with pressure was around 80% less than the expected points added on a play that was clean. So you are absolutely getting you're impacting the play.
Yeah.
You're just not impacting a play in the same way that's as easily measured. So I just wanted to circle back to that pressure comment that he made, because I think a lot of people in your audience will probably go, what are you talking about? Obviously a sack is better. It is, but a pressure is the thing that the guy can control and an indicator that the process is sound, and it is also valuable.
And that pressure can lead to sacks for somebody else. Like, as a film nerd, how many times am I looking and seeing, oh, Drake's looking, but he has to adjust just the slightest a bit, and it makes him late and either completely blows up the play or forces him to run or do something like that. So pressure has always been a very underrated stat. Sacks are very important, but sack has one defined outcome, whereas a pressure could lead to something that's even more valuable than a sack. And I also am very curious, Sam, about how you describe the edge position, because it is, I think, regarded as a deep edge class, which I don't think is wrong, but I think there's something to be said about where the drop-off is in quality, because I don't think the guys like the Derek Moores and the Romello Heights, they're not bad players. I think you can get very good values for them, but I did feel similarly about how once you get past like the early second, maybe, you're just not getting a guy that you feel very confident about either turning into a full-time starter or being the kind of pass rusher that you like, that you could maybe develop. So where is that line maybe for you? And Malachi Lawrence, for me, is kind of dead in the middle of those, where I'm like, I could see him going on to become a very good player, but also I haven't watched as much tape as I would like to, but also I'm not quite sure how comfortable I am projecting him there relative to other people in this class.
Yeah, I think if you're just to analyze the way that the mock drafts and the consensus are going, which, like, as a data scientist, has a lot of value. Lindsay mentioned the wisdom of the crowds. It's my job as a data scientist to collect every possible insight I can and put it together. So if I had to like tier them a little bit, it's obviously Bain, Bailey, and if you want to include Arvell Reese, they're at the top. And those guys will probably be going by 10 if I was a betting man, really, 10 to 15. Then there's a second class that I'll call the first, second round. Like, it'd be a surprise if they make it to the second round, but they're probably on the borderline altogether, which is, Howell, Mesidor, Young, and then if you want to throw in R. Mason Thomas, I think that's the other group. And then that's kind of where the cut line is for me, because once you start looking at the other guys, it's like a team could fall in love with them, and all of a sudden they're a first-round pick or an early second-round pick. But I could just as well see them falling to the early or mid-third round. And I think once you start getting those bigger distributions and what people think about them, that's kind of where you have to draw another cut line. So I think realistically, there's probably 6 to 7 guys that any given team would have a first round grade on or be willing to take in the first round. And there's probably, if I had to set the line, it would probably be like 4 or 5 edge rushers that are taken in the first round maximum. And then you add in maybe 1 or 2 else on that. And then after that, I think that's really where you start to, I wouldn't say worry about value, as you mentioned. They could very well be good players. They just don't necessarily have the profile that you want to see as compared to the cluster of wide receivers that you could potentially get, or, a tight end here or there, or an offensive lineman that you could potentially pick up. I think that's kind of the cut line for me.
One thing to keep in mind too with the edge rushers is, like, we're looking at them again in buckets of tiers of this year's edge rushers. So, but I think it's important to keep in mind, like, so we talked to Bucky Brooks on the Sumer Sports Show at Combine. And one of the things that he talked about was he described pass rushers as Batman and Robin. Like, ideally you want a Batman and then you want a Robin. And he described Ruben Bain as a Robin. So I think that in terms of context of like how we're viewing the guys at the top, this goes to my original point, which is the guys at the top are not as top as we're used to seeing. And what I heard about from a number of people is, like, when you're looking to contextualize this year's group of top guys, they're not Abdul Carter. So we've got Abdul Carter, like, okay, now that's a different conversation that we're coming in under that. So you're starting to kind of tier them already. And so then it becomes the conversation that I mentioned at the top, which is how much drop off is there from the elite of this class? And are they actually elite, or are they just the best of this class? And then that next tier. And there might not be as much drop off if you go find the valuable traits that you're looking for in that next group. And I think, like, another example of like a Shamar Stewart in last year's class, for maybe different reasons. It was a production versus traits conversation. Like, he was the obvious Robin to me. Like, you got to go put him somewhere where there is someone else, and then he can benefit from maybe a little bit less like blocking attention, and we can develop him the things that we see as weaknesses. But I thought from a context standpoint for this conversation, that was an interesting way of framing it, like that maybe the guy at the top is a Robin. So.
And what is Batman just like the freak where he's got the bend, he's got the
So.
burst, and it's just like one of those guys where you just have a hard time even your hands on them?
That's the guy who's going up against the good left tackle, who has the chance to get around him most consistently, who has the ability to win all the time. And like, and then the other guy, my guess is the Robin is the guy who benefits from that guy's gravity, you know, to a degree, and
Yeah,
can have success.
Yep.
Yeah, and this has become kind of a paradigm too in the NFL where I think the Steelers kind of set the paradigm where it was like, we have TJ Watt, he's going to line up in the same spot. Good luck. Like, have fun messing with him. By the way, on the other side, we're going to have Alex Highsmith and Nick Herbig as well. You look at the Texans as well. It's a little less, but it's like, we have Will Anderson. He's going to beat you every single play. By the way, on the other side, we also have Daniil Hunter.
As you guys know,
That's like that's like
very well.
Right. So like you kind of try to build this paradigm. It's a little tougher with young guys, but there's especially on a team like the Patriots where you kind of have a Batman and a Batman at the defensive tackle position. And really in the playoffs, it looked like you have a Batman and the Batman. Maybe it looks a little bit more like the Eagles look, where you're able to take a guy like Nolan Smith in, and then is he an off-ball linebacker? Is he on the edge? Then all of a sudden he becomes one of the best run stuffers in the NFL, especially when guys are pulling, he just drops the hammer. You're able to take a shot on a Jalen Phillips who has a lot of injury concerns and has a weird kind of, 6'6", 6'7", lanky frame. But then all of a sudden you take a shot on him via a trade. All of a sudden he becomes a premier guy as well. And so I think the Patriots are in a good spot because of the two defensive tackles where they can add in a Robin or a guy who doesn't necessarily have that certified blue chip profile, bring him in, let him develop, because you're really going to have a pretty defined role in a defense that is built around the interior. And then you can kind of develop yourself as a player outside of that.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like they want to spend in free agency and edge. And I think that's why, because you got your Batmans already and you're set.
We kept you guys way longer than we promised. So that's
our fault.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, this is like,
God forbid some friends talk the draft. I mean, good Lord. God forbid.
I would continue the conversation as long as we possibly could. Unfortunately, I know that you guys probably have a lot of stuff to get to, as do we, and all this good stuff. But honestly, one of the better podcast interviews we've had in some time here on the show. Like, super informative. One that, I'm looking here, I'm looking at my other screen because the Kobe Turner thing, the way the Rams did the transfer up thing fascinated me. And maybe I was so naive to it, but like, that's such an intricate thing that I had never even thought of before. And so that it's super cool. Just, looking at all of this stuff. So we appreciate all of the time. And before we do get you out of here, I know that I'm sure our fans of the show are going to want to know a lot more about what you guys do over at Sumer. So tell them where we can find and they can find everything that you guys are up to over there, because truly it's like groundbreaking, fascinating stuff that you guys are putting out over there.
And also whatever innovation you guys came up with this week.
Yeah,
I know. It's been that kind of a year. I work with some smart people in the tech space. I would say if you go to sumersports.com, that's SUMER, there are links to just about everything at the top of the page. And if you are interested in any of the things that we've talked about here, there's something there for you. There's data pages that are free. They're ungated. The Sumer Live stuff that I mentioned from the postseason, that's something that we're going to continue to try and offer in the fall. And so if you want to just go play around with some of the Patriots games there and see what's offered, I think you'll find it's really fun. The level of like depth of information that you can find out about your team. And that all was happening and updating after every single play before the next play happened. Keep that in mind. And then the other thing that I want to point you to is the draft show that I mentioned that's called The Evaluation. You can find that links to it on our website, but also just on YouTube by going to the Sumer Sports YouTube page. We have a draft show that highlights all of our scouts. So we have a ton of scouts on staff that are former general managers and like director of scouting personnel for different teams, tons of them, over 500 years of NFL experience on staff. And then they do scouting reports on this year's class. Sam provides the data. And then we have a conversation about those two different points of view. And some of the conversations that we've had here about positional value and opportunity cost, we have those conversations with the former general managers. It feels a little bit like being a fly on the wall in a front office. And I think that people who are interested in the draft will really, really enjoy the show. So I suggest you go check it out.
And not for nothing, the wide receiver position was this past week. So
Love
go check it out.
Please check it out, guys. Fascinating stuff. As I said, we lost Taylor. We went too long. His computer probably died. He just texted me the computer died. So we got the spinning wheel of death there from Taylor. But good stuff. Seriously, Lindsay and Sam, thank you guys so much. As you all know, we'll be here on Patriots Press Pass the rest of the week as well as into free agency. So make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. And until next time, again, Sumer Sports, Lindsay Rhodes, and Sam Bruchhaus. Learned that very well before the show. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And we will see you guys soon. Peace out, everyone.